To welcome and introduce our featured speaker of the evening, Dr. Hilary Flowers. As so many of you know, for many years, the snail kite has been associated with the identity of Audubon Everglades and has been our logo for as long as I can remember. Tonight, Dr. Flowers will tell us why Palm Beach County has always been such a critical place for snail kites and why now more than ever, it is important to the survival of this unique and much loved raptor. Dr. Flowers is an associate professor of environmental studies at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg. She earned her BA in English literature at the University of Virginia. What a great background to initially have and then switch to the biological science. And then she earned her MS in geology at the University the University of California, Santa Barbara, and her PhD in geology at the University of South Florida. As a geologist interested in the intersection of ecohydrology and climate change, she has conducted laboratory experiments and used geochemical modeling to better understand how saltwater intrusion can affect nutrient availability in estuaries through water-rock interactions. She has also used ecological landscape modeling to I just lost my place. She has also used ecological landscape modeling to envision how the Everglades landscape may respond to different scenarios of sea level rise and rainfall. Her study somehow led to research about the Everglades snail kite, and we're glad she did, and endangered raptor. The result is her book, The Kite and the Snail, published by the University Press of Florida, that outlines a quest for hope in a damaged world, exploring how it became endangered and the people trying to save it. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hilary Flower of Eckerd College as she weaves together ecology, personal journey, and hope in a powerful presentation entitled The Snail Kite's Secret History in the Palm Beach Area. Hilary, please share your screen and begin your wonderful presentation whenever you are ready. And please watch for links in the chat about Hilary's book and resources that you can download as well.
Thank you, Scott. Can everyone see my screen? There's a slide. Okay, you can see it. Okay. So if you prefer, I can talk to you about geochemical modeling, but I'm guessing you'd rather me talk about the snail kite. And I agree, it's been my obsession for the last few years. As you heard, I'm a geologist, so I'm not a biologist or even a true birder, but I've become really fascinated by snail kites. And I was especially excited to talk with you all because in the book, there's all kinds of crazy stories. A lot of you have heard about the rapid adaptation. There's so many twists and turns in the snail kite story. And we'll touch on some of those today. But I want to especially talk with you all about the Palm Beach area, because one of the most exciting and entertaining and fascinating parts of this whole journey for me was getting to know their history in the Palm Beach area. It was a complete surprise to me. I have spent most of my time sort of bouncing between St. Pete, in the Tampa Bay area, and then the Everglades and Big Cypress. And that's where I did my dissertation research, and I always take students there. And I never really, honestly, had spent any time in the Palm Beach area or really thought that it could possibly be important in this crazy snail kite story. But in fact, I spent probably most of my fieldwork time in the Palm Beach area, and the snail kites just kept bringing me there and kept surprising me.
Hilary, by the way, speaking of snail kites, I just launched the poll. So if you want to, it's up right now and people are answering.
Wonderful.
Okay. And people can see it on their screen.
Perfect. And yeah, I wanted to start with a poll to see how many of you have seen snail kites, because I think that's one of the really exciting things about living in the Palm Beach area, as many of you do, is that you get to hang out with snail kites when you want to. So I do want to find out how many of you have seen snail kites. And so in telling this I think of this talk as my love letter to the Palm Beach area on behalf of myself and snail kites. And in order to really tell you that story, I'm going to start with some background basics about the Everglades snail kite. and then talk about a drought in the 1980s that led to some discoveries. And then I'm going to talk about 3 crucial landscapes for snail kites in the Palm Beach area. One is an endangered landscape, one is heavily altered, and one was lost and has been recovered. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up with what we can do to help them, and then maybe hear some of your questions and get to talk with you. So as many of you know, it doesn't take much. If you go on to eBird, you can see how much the snail kites love the Palm Beach area. This is just the last 4 months. You know, this is 2026 so far, and you can see the Palm Beach area is kind of on fire when it comes to snail kites. So I don't know if people have had a chance to fully answer the poll, but that's my question for you.
They have, and we have the results actually to all the questions. They all came up simultaneously. So
Okay.
do you want to know the results?
Sure. Especially to the first one.
I'll end the poll, and I can share all the results if you'd like me to, for everyone to see.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And share results.
Okay. So about 28% have said no, they haven't seen one yet. About 60% have seen them in Palm Beach County, and about 30% have seen them outside of Palm Beach County. And maybe let's stop sharing the poll results for now, just because the second question probably won't make sense to people yet. But can we share the results again later?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to minimize that. I don't know if you want to put it away. I don't know how polls work. Thank you. So as many of you know, snail kites have a very distinctive white bar at the base of their tail, a very hooked bill, and the males have red eyes and orange feet and orange at the base of their bill, and females are brown and cream, often with white eyebrows, and their feet may be orange or yellow, and the same for the base of their bill. And young ones look similar to females with yellow feet, and they may have more cinnamon or warm tan colored feathers like this guy, and their eyes are usually not red yet. And so taking apart the name, Everglades snail kite, all of the parts of their name mean something important. And kites are birds that are known for their graceful soaring. They're named after the toy kite, as in go fly a kite, because of their graceful soaring. And kites are in the hawk and eagle family. And they are so laser focused on a single prey item that they are named for it, apple snails. There's only one native apple snail to Florida, the Florida apple snail, Palmacia pallidosa, which means marsh apple. And they're a specialist predator with extreme specialization. When apple snails are available, they make up more than 99% of the snail kite's diet. So they specialize. And so to do so, they've evolved the millennia to be extremely effective in every aspect of foraging for these apple snails. First, their wings are the right shape and size for slow flight and hovering. I'm wondering if someone might need to mute. And they can hover barely moving, and you just wonder how they're not falling out of the sky. And they have to be able to spot apple snails. They fly around 15 feet above the marsh, staring straight down. It looks kind of reckless when you see them. And they have the advantage of having the visual acuity of eagles and hawks. And the snails crawl up the vegetation to breathe near the surface. They have a little snorkel-like feature called a siphon. It allows them to breathe near the surface, but it also allows snail kites to see them. And to spot them, though, snail kites need to have a little window of clear water in order to see the snail. So if the vegetation is too dense or if the water is rippled, then it's not really going to work for them. Snail kites have especially long legs, feet, toes, and talons. It's like they're features of a hawk just stretched out so that they can wrap around and grab and carry these slippery round snails. And they carry them to a plucking perch, and that's where their specialized bill comes in handy. The apple snail has an operculum, which is like a little door that closes and protects the snail. And the snail kite bills are really narrow. They're kind of like a letter opener, and they can slip it in there and pry off the operculum. And then the curvature of the bill comes in. So they have hyper curved bills. The snail is tethered to its shell by a little muscle called the columellar muscle. And so in order for the snail kite to take the snail out of its shell, they have to snip that muscle. And I love that their bill is curved snail-like so that they can go around the interior bend of the snail's shell and snip that muscle. So they have snail curved bills. So I think of their bills as kind of like a can opener. It's a perfect tool for the job. Not great for catching fish or other birds or anything like that, but perfect if you want to eat snails. And another adaptation they have for foraging for snails is to find the best spots for snail foraging at any given moment in time. The Florida apple snail is a bit of a specialist itself. It will eat plants, but its favorite food is called periphyton. And if you've been to the Everglades, you've seen this kind of strange feature. Periphyton's really cool. It's not a single thing. It's a community of algae and diatoms and bacteria and small animals and algae. And the algae is calcareous, which is the same calcium carbonate that gives seashells their hard part. And so it gives it's microscopic calcium carbonate structure, but it gives it a nice spongy quality. So it's not the slimy kind of algae that everyone hates. And periphyton grows around the stems of plants, kind of like, I think of it as like a corn dog. So they look kind of like plant stems with sweaters down in the Everglades. And so the prime habitat for the native apple snail comes down to, well, what does periphyton need? And it needs stalks to grow around, and it needs vegetation that's well spaced enough so that there's plenty of light getting through the water for the periphyton to photosynthesize. And periphyton also needs water that's shallow, again, so that the light can penetrate, and low nutrient water so that it's very clear. And if all of that is in place, snail kites can find lots of native apple snails. And so they seek out these periphyton-filled, low nutrient wetlands. And where do they nest and roost? They like to nest and roost in trees and willows, cattail, and they need at least a meter of water below their nest throughout the whole time they're nesting because, and this is interesting, it's deep enough for gators. And gators keep predators out like raccoons. And so even though gators sometimes do predate into the nest themselves for eggs or young, it's rare enough that it's an advantage for the snail kites to have the gators around. So they need plenty of water to stay under their nest while they're nesting. And they need good foraging nearby. And it's called the Everglade snail kite. So there are 3 subspecies of snail kite. They're distinguishable genetically, and our subspecies lives in Florida and Cuba, although we haven't actually documented any movement between those populations, but they're genetically the same. So they're named for the Everglades. So the Everglades, this is the Everglades watershed prior to drainage. So water that fell on Orlando would slowly flow through this really broad, shallow sheet of water out to the sea. And it was called a river of grass because the water was clear enough and shallow enough and slow moving enough that vegetation could grow throughout it. Not like a normal river with rushing water where you can't have vegetation. So throughout the Everglades, there was vegetation, but it was sparse because the nutrients were low. And so the historical range of snail kites in Florida before drainage and development gained momentum around 1900, you can see that they used a lot of the state, including around the Panhandle. Wakulla River had a nesting colony, but you can also see that they were concentrated in South Florida, in the Everglades, and you can see a big chunk in the Palm Beach area. So they were named for the Everglades because they are were historically so abundant in the Everglades. And I think of the Everglades and the snail kite as having been one, kind of evolved together over the millennia. And so Florida was a snail kite making engine. It was popping out baby snail kites every year. And it's really not that long ago, just over 100 years, this was their world. And I love that Everglades Audubon has a snail kite as its emblem. I think that just shows that the snail kite is synonymous with the Everglades and vice versa. It's a way of staking a claim on the world of the snail kite not disappearing from the planet. Of course, by 1900, drainage and development started in earnest. The Everglades was diminished by about 50% in the 20th century. Snail kite range shrank down to 9% of their historical range. And the population estimate for snail kites in the middle of the 20th century was 25 to 100 individuals. So what that tells me is that we may have lost them before we were even really paying attention. So it was a close call. When we first started an endangered species list, the very first list included the Florida Everglade kite. And people have asked me why it's not Everglades kite, plural. I have no idea. It seems to have started in some writing in the 19th century and it just stuck. So that's that. And once you're on the endangered species list, one tool for protection is critical habitat. And what is critical habitat? It's habitat that without that habitat, a species is likely to go extinct. And so by designating critical habitat, you protect the habitat that is keeping that species on the planet. And I love that when the federal government was working on figuring out what to designate as critical habitat for the snail kite, look who they consulted: Audubon Everglades and some other Audubon groups, including the Florida Audubon Society. So there's Palm Beach right in there. And so this is what they came up with. This was 1977. The snail kite had not been studied for very long. And so this was based on best information. And you can see that it's the water conservation areas and the western marsh of Lake Okeechobee and a couple really tiny wetlands up further north of that. But the bulk of the critical habitat was the western marsh of Lake Okeechobee and these water conservation areas. So for West Palm Beach County, it was those water conservation areas were included. Okay, so as we start to head towards the Palm Beach story, there are two wildlife biologists who were very active in the 1980s that I want to talk to you about. One of them is Jean Takakawa. She was based here in the Loxahatchee Wildlife Refuge, and we'll get back to her. And the other is Steve Beisinger, who did a lot of work in this water conservation area here, 3A, and in Moonshine Bay, which is part of the western marsh of Lake Okeechobee. And he spent a lot of time there because that was where the snail kite nesting hotspots were. So that was where to go if you wanted to study the nesting of snail kites. And he sent me some photos of him doing field work, and I just love thinking of someone way up above the marsh on a platform with a spotting scope, taking notes with a stopwatch, watching those kites nest and learning about them. And they would take nestlings out for measurements and to put bands on them so they could be recognized out and about later on, which gave them valuable information about what wetlands were important to snail kites. So one of their banded kites, one of their banded babies from 1979, will appear later in our story. And maybe it's even this little guy right here, but we don't know, but it's one of them. And sometimes they would put radio transmitters on with solar panels on their backs. And then Steve would go around on his airboat. This is an airboat equipped with a work desk so they could band the kites. And you can see the spotting scope. And he would motor around the marsh, rotating an antenna on this pole to try to pick up the signals of the radio transmitters. So I think that's really fun. But then drought hit in 1981, and their prime nesting areas dried up. A fire went through this marsh. This is near Moonshine Bay. This was where they were watching nesting the previous year. And you can see it's just dead. So the usual spots for studying snail kites, the snail kites were gone. And to the extent that they were still visible, they were often eating turtles. And I don't know about you, but a lot of people have been posting on social media their snail kite photos show them eating turtles again this year. So it's a 25-year drought. It's really a deep drought. And so snail kites, remember, if they can eat snails, they will. So when they're eating turtles, it's cool because it shows how adaptable they are. And notice that they arrange the turtle the same way they do the snail so that they can use their behavioral adaptability. So here's how they arrange a snail. And unless you're squeamish about seeing dead turtles, this is a snail kite from this year eating a turtle. And you can see it's arranged the turtle exactly how it arranges snails. So it's great that they're so adaptable. I do love seeing that, but I do worry when I see them eating turtles because it means that they are stressed. So soon the snail kites were entirely gone from their usual wetlands, their critical habitat. And the guy tasked with counting them, it was Jim Rogers, that year in 1981. He found only 109 snail kites. And he said they seemed to have gone into a black hole. You never figured out where they went. The newspapers put them on extinction watch. The demise of kite may be signaled to all mankind. It's very threatening. This is another article, Rare Bird Imperiled by Drought and Man. People were still shooting kites then, by the way. They interviewed someone who rescued a kite from a ditch in Palm Beach County, but it did end up dying. And she said, you feel like sitting down and crying your heart out because they're so beautiful and there are so few left. And if you notice, there's a sidebar on this newspaper story, and that is the brainchild of Jean Takakawa of Waxahachie Refuge. She started the kite sighting hotline. So this was before eBird, before citizen science was even a thing. She enlisted the help of people all around Florida. She did a media blitz, 200 radio stations and newspapers to get the word out and to get people to call in if they saw a snail kite. And she carefully vetted them. She had a list of questions because sometimes it was a swallowtail kite. And then she would go out in person to verify whenever possible. And she realized it was a massive dispersal. So snail kites are not stationary and they're not migratory. They are nomads. They can move hundreds of miles as needed to find snails, which is just so cool. It's a really cool behavioral adaptation they have. But the drought dragged into a second year. So the 1981 drought became the 81-82 drought, and the kite population decreased by half. And the burning question was, where did the survivors find refuge? Because they were not in, their usual wetlands. And so this kite sighting hotline gave Jean Takakawa some really interesting answers. So here's the map that Jean Takakawa and Steve Beisinger published after the 81-82 drought. And it shows the results from the kite sighting hotline. And this is a photo that Jean took of a kite that she found in the drought of 1985. And it was in kind of a cattail ditch. It would have been a wetland that you would have just overlooked on a normal year. And there's a snail kite. And 0 of their drought-related wetlands were in their critical habitat. So the drought-related wetlands are these dots, and the critical habitat is the black and then the hatch. So they were surviving elsewhere. And so because these other wetlands were so essential to the kites that did survive, Takakawa and Beisinger dubbed them emergency wetlands. And what they wrote about, Steve pointed out, that droughts had become more deadly to kites because they probably always experienced droughts over the millennia, which is how they got this behavioral adaptation to go to be nomads and go where the snails are. But by the 1980s, droughts had already become more frequent and more severe. So climate change was already being felt. And the lower water table from drainage meant that wetlands were drying up faster. And then development had drastically reduced the number of alternative wetlands for kites to use. So they need these emergency wetlands to survive. Do you notice any clusters of these emergency wetlands anywhere? Anywhere? Maybe Palm Beach? So there's this cluster, right? And many of them, and they did this write up in their paper, many of them were urban, kind of what an ecologist might have thought of as throwaway wetlands, right? Agricultural canal, urban canal, agricultural field, roadside canal. So these were wetlands in human-dominated environments. Marshes, ponds, retention ponds. Jean found that Wellington Pond hosted a concentration of snail kites in that drought. So what's with that shape? You notice that it's not like a round blob. It's kind of snaky. So some of you already know, but in the historical Everglades, there was this curious, often overlooked arm of the Everglades called Loxahatchee Slough. And it connected the Everglades and the North Fork of the Loxahatchee River. So it's different from the river per se, but it made a connection. And this is cool. The direction of flow, whether it was going north or south, varied depending on local rainfall. And drainage was really poor. There was no large outflow to the Everglades or to tide other than the Loxahatchee River, and no coastal rivers. And the area was so wet in the historical pre-drainage condition that you could canoe from Jupiter Inlet to Hillsborough Inlet. Think about that. And in the wet season, that was in the wet season too. In the wet season, you could canoe from the Everglades into Palm Beach. This is an observation from 1907. West of Palm Beach, there's a ridge near the edge of the glades, but at high water, Glades water comes over into Clear Lake, and Indians bring their canoes into Clear Lake. So I just love to think about that much more water flowing in the system. I think it's really hard for us to imagine today. And Loxahatchee Slough was probably always important to the snail kites. That's what Gene figured out, seeing the pattern that showed up in the emergency wetlands, how they traced the Loxahatchee Slough. It was like the snail kites knew to go there. So what was it? Well, in the slough itself, it was a lot of sawgrass and lilies type of sloughs. And it was bordered by more wetlands. So this says eastern flatwoods. That was pinelands, but they were dotted with all these little wetlands. And the pinelands themselves were 1 to 2 feet deep in water in the wet season. So this was very much a wetland. And then there was this cypress slough along this edge. And then it's the main Everglades. Here's Loxahatchee Refuge right here for today. So it makes sense that the snail kites would have spent a lot of time there. So as Florida became more developed, the land was cut with canals to drain water to the sea, and it lowered the water sufficiently to prevent flooding to the coast. So you can no longer ride your canoe over to the coast. They brought water levels down about 6 feet. Just imagine 6 feet of water over your head when you're standing around in Palm Beach. And so Flagler purchased about 17,000 acres of Loxahatchee Slough for water supply. Much of the rest was drained, but not all of it. It was well known in the early 20th century as a snail kite breeding site. So at least 23 egg sets were collected in the 1920s. In 1921, kites were reported to be breeding abundantly in Loxahatchee Marsh. But after 1927, decades with no recorded sightings of snail kites. So the Loxahatchee water catchment area that Flagler preserved for drinking water. In 1955, the city of West Palm Beach bought that water supply system from Flagler's company. In 1964, and this, by the way, this information, I pulled it from the Grassy Waters website. They have a kind of a timeline, which I found very helpful. 1964, Florida legislature designated this water system as a protected water catchment for drinking water. So it got state protection. And much of the rest became residential, agricultural, mines, shell pit mines, and weedy shrubland. So a researcher in the 70s did start seeing them again, and he found them in this little area. I don't know if you recognize the shape of it. And it's labeled here Lake Park Reservoir. And he documented where the snail kites were nesting in this water catchment area. In 1981, it became closed to the public due to damage from recreational uses. So we saw that it was an important source of emergency wetlands for the snail kites. So how did this remnant arm of the Everglades, Loxahatchee Slough, stay wet when the rest of the Everglades, including Loxahatchee Refuge, dried up? It's a mystery. And so Beisinger and Takakawa figured it out. And they found that the Loxahatchee Slough retained more water during droughts because, number one, and maybe you all have noticed this, it's in the state's highest rainfall zone, more than 60 inches of rainfall a year. Also, the soil, there's an impermeable layer, so less water is lost to the groundwater, more water stays at the surface. So that's key. And there was very little outflow. We saw before, there was very little outflow either to the Everglades or to tide. So the water tends to stay. It's almost like a little basin. A chunk of it, as we saw, was protected by Palm Beach County and what later became the city of West Palm Beach and the state of Florida. So it's protected, parts of it. And then development was rapid, but not as rapid in the 80s as it was in some of the areas to the south. So that meant that there were still some more remnants of wetlands in the 80s. So that's how there came to be so many emergency wetlands there. So they learned a lot. They published their paper. In 1985, there was another drought. And Gene Takakawa launched the snail kite sighting hotline again. It was a well-oiled machine by now. This rainfall map from April 1985 shows that Palm Beach area got a lot more rainfall than anywhere else in the state. So kites flocked back to many of the same emergency wetlands that they had used before. So this is the emergency wetlands that they used in little open circles. And then I shaded in dark gray here the critical habitat as it was designated in 1977. So you may notice that once again, their emergency wetlands in 85 were not in their critical habitat. So there's a disconnect there. And once again, it was a lot of canals, ditches, low quality wetlands, small marshes, ponds, retention ponds. And as I mentioned, Wellington Pond became an important, albeit small, emergency wetland. It was for a while they were using, it was in a Wellington subdivision. I think it's a preserve now, but at the time it was a drainage canal and cattail wetlands. And she was shocked to find snail kites there in this, developed area. All right, so she got a call from some birders pointing her to a few kites that they had spotted in a particular area. It was an area that she didn't even know there was a wetland. And this is from an interview I did with her in 2024. Hopefully you won't get a jump scare when I show up on the screen. But here's Jean in her own words.
Went there and met them there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're on like a dirt road, that kind of thing, looking out at this flooded wetland, which I can't admit I knew much about either. And it was within West Palm Beach. And the birds were way off, and there were wading birds too. But there were clearly some kites. And so I started going back there in the evening. And that was that remarkable discovery that there was what ended up becoming, in that time period, the largest roost ever found.
So this is a picture from that roost. She's in a canoe. This is at a place she called the landfill site because it was earmarked to become a landfill. It was an abandoned shell pit mining operation from the 1960s. So there were these deep gouges in the bedrock that filled with 10 feet of water. And then the overburden was these long linear islands that had been completely taken over by Brazilian pepper and Australian pine. But they did a count there, and she counted 372 snail kites during that 1985 drought. And you can see there, you can see one of the snail kites that was actually by a nest. So at the end of the 85 drought, there were only 400 snail kites counted at all in Florida. And 372 of them had used this landfill site roost. So I think of it as a miracle roost in Palm Beach County. It really saved the snail kites. And it was, again, a drought where they lost 50% of their population. And so a lot of them survived because of Palm Beach County. But I I knew that she had seen a nest there, and I'll tell you about it. But she found some more photos this past weekend, and she sent them to me. So this is new to me too. This is the male snail kite, and she said there was a fledgling flying around. She did not get a photo of it, and she said there's a nest in the photo. I thought this might be the nest. She said it might be, but she thought it might be a little closer down from the male kite. But there is a nest right near here. And it was a year, I mean, it's a drought year. They were barely surviving. And here's a kite nesting. It's one of the few kite nests that whole year. So truly a miracle. She never saw the female, but she could see the young fledgling. So this is a photo from July 1985. And the male snail kite was banded. And she could read the band. And it was one of Beisinger's bands from 1979. So she knew where that kite had been born. So shell mining in Florida, I kind of described it. It leaves a corrugated pattern in the landscape of these pit kind of gouges in the landscape, and then islands of overburden, about 10 feet deep. And this is very artificial, right? Like you don't have 10 feet deep water in the Everglades like anywhere. It's not really an Everglades thing. It's such a shallow wetland historically. But these deep gouges that were dug by the mining operation stayed wet in the drought, right? So it was kind of good given the way we had drained and developed the Palm Beach area and most of Florida. The kites actually kind of need these strange, human created, abandoned, damaged wetlands sometimes because deep water will stay wet. It has a much better chance of staying wet even in a deep drought. And that's what was happening. So, and because the water is deep, again, the key is that it's deep enough for gators. So the gators make it a safe place for birds to roost because it keeps out the raccoons. And I should mention, she mentioned wading birds. This was a massive wading bird rookery. So thousands of wading birds were coming in and tending their nests while she was doing the kite counts. And so the water was in these deep-sided gouges, right? So that's not, you don't have like, spike rush and sawgrass growing out of that. So you don't have paraphyton and you don't have snails. So it was a perfect place to roost and to nest, but there were no signs of snails at the roost site. So if they were roosting in the landfill site by night, where were they foraging during the day? So here's Jean.
And nobody went out there because we had to get special permission to take the boat out there. So it was a very protected spot. I thought that was pretty smart of the kites. But what was kind of mysterious was where were they all feeding?
So here's a map. I found it. I spent all weekend like getting deeper into this mystery. And so here's the landfill site right here, where she counted 372 kites in the drought of 1985, and that's the wading bird rookery right there. And then this is the surviving water catchment. And she noticed that kites were flying in to roost from the west. They're flying in from the west. And what's there? The drinking water for the city of West Palm Beach. So, wonder what that is. So here's Jean again.
I was so much concern because, of course, then I had to research, well, what the heck is this place?
Yeah.
And the fear that, West Palm Beach was booming and growing and developing. And they had actually placed a landfill and recovery site nearby there recently. And I was like, and I think there were plans to put housing. all around it, right up to the edge. And so we tried really hard to explain to the West Palm Beach folks how critical their site was, and that we didn't know that. But because I was curious, I was sort of thinking sadly that before we talked today, I wonder if that catchment area is gone. And I looked up and I see that it's called a preserve now. Yes, so it might be worth learning more about that. They I can't remember if it's called Loxahatchee Preserve or what it's called. I don't think so. It's some other name, but they have trails and a boardwalk. And the picture I saw looked kind of beautiful. And the little write-up, it was very short, said how important a wetland was, both for, I think it's still a source of fresh water, but it specifically mentioned, and really important for snail kites. I'm like, oh,
that's amazing.
Could it be that actually is still there all these years later and is being, nurtured?
I can't believe that. That's amazing.
I hope so. Because I was just dreading looking it up because I thought it's gone, it's developed, it's housing, they call it a preserve. And they have a nonprofit group that helps steward it. Yeah.
Okay, so this was what that other poll was supposed to be. So maybe you could put your answers in the chat. What preserve is Jean Takakawa describing? And Scott, can you read me some of the answers? Or Autumn?
I can get you. Let's see what we have. Possibly winding waters, grassy waters preserve, water catchment area. We got grassy waters. We got a couple of grassy waters.
Well, I won't keep you all in suspense further. Grassy waters preserve. Yes. And I thought it was amazing. I called there. I found out they have kayak trips, and I was like, I have to get out there. They actually have, I don't know if this is backwards where you're seeing it, but they have a beautiful children's book with a snail kite as the hero. And yet they did not know, and they have a snail kite as their emblem. But this piece of history, this 372 kite roost, and how the kites had been foraging in what turned out later to be grassy waters, that knowledge there was a gap after Jean left and the education center opened many years later. So of course I had to go, and Lauren Butcher, who I believe is here, led a kayak trip, and I got to see how spectacularly beautiful grassy water still is. And it's a miracle because, and this I wasn't expecting, I knew it was rain fed, I knew it was pristine, but I have never seen that many of the native apple snails, the native apple snail eggs, and they were just everywhere. So a lot of we've got a native apple snail, but there's also an invasive apple snail. And very often you see the kind of pink bubblegum egg clutch of the invasive snail. But at Grassy Waters, it was just native apple snail eggs everywhere. And so I was really excited because, and Lauren said that she sees snail kites off her deck, and they are eating the native apple snails, right? Because that's what Grassy Waters is supporting. So, and Grassy Waters has nesting snail kites. So Grassy Waters has kind of a secret, whereas the native apple snail is declining in most of the Everglades. It is still very much thriving in Grassy Waters. So there's a secret there. But I wondered about the roost, right? I wasn't sure. And then I found that actually people had been monitoring it as the landfill got built, and making sure that snail kites did not get harmed. And so this is Darren Rumbold. He worked with Mary Beth Mihalik, And it turns out that even though 3 years is normal for the duration of a snail kite roost, they have used this roost continuously. So here's 1989. There were 212 snail kites roosting in that same roost. They were still needing it. And once again, he clocked that they were coming in from the west. So they were coming in from Grassy Waters and the J.W. Corbett. And during his time, he saw that the wading bird rookery was going great guns too. And I was thrilled to find out it's still there. It's still being protected by Palm Beach County and the Solid Waste Authority there. And they support all kinds of different wildlife. It's a really neat area. It's still got those pits, but it is exactly what wildlife needs. And so here's 196 kites coming into roost in 2019. So the SWA folks there still do kite counts, even though they are not required to for their permit anymore. So of course I had to invite myself there. Here's David Broughton and Mandy Krupa. They are still monitoring the kites once a month. So it's really, to me, it's a miracle. And I was like, is it the same roost? Are they using the same roost? And he was like, yep, it's right there. And so he pointed it out. It's right here. And you can, the snail kites are still coming in to roost there. So what I was realizing through this project is that the kites need the two Floridas, the pristine, right? The parts of the Everglades that are still there, like Grassy Waters, but also because of the way we've changed Florida, they also need certain drastically altered but unexpectedly crucial wetlands, and the SWA was one of them. And so what the SWA showed me was that humans really can share the landscape with wildlife. And so if this is Grassy Waters here, Loxahatchee Slough was really lost during Gene Takakawa's day. But in the 1990s, Palm Beach County started buying it up, 13,000 plus acres. And I talked with Melissa Tolbert, who spearheaded some of this restoration work. It's now called the Loxahatchee Slough Natural Area. I bet it's familiar to a lot of you. And they started in this little southern corner called Roma in August 2002. It was just wall-to-wall Melaleuca in that corner. And this is what it looks like now. So it's just stunning. So they took this, the spoil pile, and made this. And I'm just so excited to see something that was gone and now it's back. And I think that's a real great success story for Palm Beach, for wildlife in general, and snail kites in particular. So the restoration wrapped up in 2015. By 2019, snail kites were nesting there. And here's Melissa Tolbert with a really cute baby. In 2020, Loxahatchee Slough Natural Area was the biggest snail kite super site in the state for 2020. And she has partnered with the Palm Beach Zoo and the ARCI, Avian Research and Conservation Institute, with Dr. Ken Meyer and Gina Kent to help the kites and also the swallowtail kites. So I was able to go out with Gina, and here she is scoping out. This is a cypress tree we had seen snail kites using as a plucking perch. So when the snail kite left, we came and scoped it out, and we were able to trap a snail kite. And it was really amazing to watch Gina Kent work. And the cool thing about her work is they were able to test for mercury, which is really important, a possible hazard for snail kites and other wildlife. But they're also able to track snail kites as they move. And so it's a way of asking snail kites, what wetlands are most important to you? So I'm going to show you a quick video of her releasing the snail kite that we caught, and we named it Roma Red. Roma for the little corner of this slough.
You can be. All right. do it. Oh, oh my gosh, look at your hand. Thank you, my love. That was beautiful. Oh, baby, thank you. Let's get Michelle.
So here is some of the results. This is some of the tracking data from ARCI. They've tracked 45 GPS tracked kites from 2007 to 2025. And I want you to just look at these three maps. So this one is all the different spots the kites were showing up 2012 to 2015. This is 2016 to 2020. And this is 2021 to 2025. So big, big shifts. And this whole time, as they're basically starting to transition out of the Everglades as the native snail was declining, look at Palm Beach. Important throughout. And so here's a roost in the Loxahatchee Slough natural area. They ended up having a massive roost. I think it was one that had been there before in the general area, but it became housing. And so they created a new roost in this beautifully restored part of Loxahatchee Slough. So these are photos. And Loxahatchee Slough is extremely important for the swallowtail kites as well. So if you go back to the historical Loxahatchee Slough, and I'm wrapping up, you can see grassy waters and the Loxahatchee Slough natural area are a wonderful continuation of the historical Everglades. And we have an endangered habitat type where the snail kite is still in communion with the native snail and a very similar habitat to what it evolved for. We have an intensely altered, but somehow perfect for snail kites and for wading birds, wetland at the Solid Waste Authority in Palm Beach County. And we have the Loxahatchee Slough natural area, an area that was lost and has been gloriously recovered. And then, of course, the preserves and canals and ditches of the greater Palm Beach area, which are still serving snail kites. So as I wrap up, a lot of you have already gotten engaged in some of these activities, but I think this all begs the question, what can we do to support wildlife in Palm Beach, in the Palm Beach area? And I love this list from Grassy Waters Preserve. I'm not going to go through it all, but I kind of like the kind of display of different options. Conserving water. I found it fascinating when I was out at Grassy Waters that because it's literally the drinking water for the city of West Palm Beach. Every time you turn the tap in that city, you're taking water from Grassy Waters. So every drop that you conserve, you're keeping water in Grassy Waters. So I think conserving water has never been more literal as a way of protecting wetlands. And you can plant natives and participate in citizen science and volunteer, and you can support Audubon Everglades and all the wonderful things that you all are doing together. And you can support ARCI. You can adopt a nest and support ARCI in lots of different ways. And so this was the West Palm Beach part of the snail kite story. There are so many crazy things that have happened in their time in Florida. So I hope you will consider reading my book. I had so much fun writing it and getting to know these wonderful people and wonderful places like Gina Kent and Lauren Butcher at Grassy Waters and Melissa Tolbert at the Loxahatchee Slough Natural Area. And also, if you want free downloadables, I've got a guide for finding kites and identifying kites. If you have a book group, I would love for you to adopt my book. And I have a list of discussion questions. It's all free to download at my website, hilaryflowerauthor.com. And I want to give special thanks to Sabina Begg for arranging my coming to you, and Scott Zucker for hosting. Special thanks to Jean Takakawa and Gina Kent, Ken Meyer, Melissa Tolbert, Lauren Butcher, David Broughton, for all that you have done for me and for most of all the snail kites. And so I'm excited to hear from you. So please launch the final polls. If I don't know if we can launch them again, or just maybe give us the results of those polls. And I'd love to hear questions. So, okay, have you ever seen a snail kite? Okay, can we see the next one? Or no, maybe we scroll down. Okay, scrolling down. People did not know about the 372 snail kite roost. Some did, which I think is cool. 4 people did. Did you know that grassy waters saved snail kites in the 85 drought? 3 people did, which I think is amazing. Most people didn't. So I love sharing the story. Have you visited these places? So grassy waters, 79%. Loxahatchee Slough natural area, 79%. And then the SWA, 38%. And I'm going to close the polls, but I want to go back and emphasize that the SWA has a trail system. And you can go all the way around the rookery, and the kite roost is right here. You can't, obviously approach it, but you can see it from a distance. And the rookery is closed right now. It's closed. This part of the rookery trail is closed to protect the wading birds. But if you are one of the people that have not been to the SWA Greenway Trail System, I highly suggest that you do. And I open it up to questions.
Wow, Hilary, that was amazing. So if you have questions for Hilary, please put them into the chat. I think we all learned so much about Palm Beach County and the snail kites. I mean, I was one of those people that had no idea about that 1985 massive snail kite rookery in grassy waters. And I lived here. I came to Florida in 1979. And so that was just so fascinating. And I'm one of the people I think that are guilty of also not visiting the Solid Waste Authority site. And I think that's a place now I'm definitely planning on going to. And it's been a while since I've been to Loxahatchee Slough. I know I've been there to see the swallowtail kites, but now I need to go there to see the snail kites as well. So I think you've inspired some of us to get out there and see some of these incredible kites. So hopefully some of you have some questions for Hilary. I know that her presentation was incredibly thorough, so I don't know if there's anything she didn't tell us, but it was so informative. So let me just read some of the responses that we're getting. Most of them are just like incredible compliments. Rachel Jean Baptiste, thank you. Cheryl Schnedeker, thanks for a great informative presentation. And Wiley, Paynes Prairie also has lots of snail kites. That's up on the central part of the state. Chuck Weber, thank you for the excellent presentation. Important local history and interesting information. Shelley Rosenberg, wonderful presentation. Thank you. Rachel Sire, thank you. So informative and exciting that we are preserving some of their habitats. Yeah, and it's so wonderful that we have the environmental resources management, and we have preserved and maintained all these incredible habitats. Anik K, thanks so much for this. I unfortunately moved out of Florida before becoming a birder, but I want to return and see a snail kite now. Well, come on back, Anke. I'm sorry, Anke. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I apologize. Maxine Schreiber, thanks so much, Hilary. You were great. So informative and enthusiastic. Andrea Ersting, a wonderful presentation. Thank you. I learned a lot. Lauren Butcher, who you mentioned, who's also a member of our board of directors. Thank you so much for your inspiring work to uncover the history of snail kites in Palm Beach County and throughout the state, and the critical importance of snail kites in our backyard in their historic and ongoing survival. And Wiley, very, very interested in the amazing history of the snail kite. Thank you. Steve Saunders, thank you. I get to Florida regularly in the winter and look forward to reading your book and heading out to see kites at Grassy Waters and Loch Slough. Great presentation, Deborah Carr. Thank you, Valerie Ellis. Thank you so much, Hilary. Kathy Ombach. Question: is the Palm Beach Solid Waste Authority accessible? Amazing presentation.
It's open to the public. The trails.
And I think Autumn has led walks there. I think Autumn
I
led a walk.
do, yeah. I lead every year at holiday time, Audubon Everglades and me and an SWA partner, and we lead a walk through the rookery. So if you want to come out, look out for that during November, December.
Autumn, since you're on, did you see snail kites at your last walk?
So unfortunately, during the last walk, I was in the hospital. So I saw nothing, but the car took over for me that time. I'm not sure that they saw any snail kites. But fingers crossed that we see them this year.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, hopefully we will. Elisa Kremer Parrott said, I appreciate learning about the history of the snail kite. Very cool. Consuelo Lopez de Mesa, thanks. Excellent presentation. Benjamin Stu, who, by the way, works for the Environmental Resource Management. You know Benjamin?
And a lot of his photos were the most beautiful photos in the presentation.
Yes,
So
Benji is an amazing photographer. I couldn't agree more. Did you talk to anyone? He has a question. Did you talk to anyone at FW, I think C is W, on if they plan to update their critical habitat designations based on all that has changed since the initial designation areas were mapped?
So the only person I know who is pushing for that to be re-examined is Dr. Ken Meyer from ARCI. I don't know that it's on the table. So yeah, I think it would be nice to see that revisited.
So maybe that's something that we could, as a county, get behind and to kind of make our voices heard to help make that more possible. I think that would be a really worthwhile project. Mercedes Zapata says, incredible that I have all this in my backyard.
Yes.
Yes. Palm Beach County is an amazing birding place. Yes. I mean, a lot of us who bird here know that. And I think if you don't, you're missing something incredibly special. Is Jean Takawawa?
Akikawa.
Oh, Takakawa, thank you. Still working, and if so, where?
She has retired, but she had a huge major career out west. So she restored one of the biggest wetlands out there. So she went and kicked butt out there in the Pacific Northwest. So she really made her mark. And I think it's amazing that she's famous for all of that work. And I love shining the light on her really important work in a few short years when she was a newly minted wildlife biologist before she went out there and made her name.
And by the way, everybody, I shared the research article she published about the location from I think it was 1985 in the chat. So if you want to download and read it, you can see it. Susan Maddox says, wonderful how the snail kite is doing these days compared to the 80s and 90s in Palm Beach County. Are they still endangered or out of danger?
Well, so they're back to 3,000. So they've made a big recovery. It is currently, other than grassy waters, they're relying on the invasive snail. And there's a lot of uncertainty around that invasive snail. So I think that their numbers are good, but I don't think they're out of the woods yet. I think they're still really vulnerable. And I think the numbers have allowed a lot of people to feel overly secure about them and maybe a little complacent around really making a lot of effort to conserve them.
Can you elaborate just a little bit on what the concern is about the invasive snail kite? I mean, excuse me, the invasive apple snail?
So this is interesting. So we have these super sites, like have a super site here one year and then they're gone. And someone mentioned Payne's Prairie. Payne's Prairie was the biggest snail kite super site in 2019. And they've kind of waned there. They're still there, but that's no longer their big nesting super site. And what's happening is they're having a nesting super site when the invasive snail has a population explosion. So it's not, and we see them all over the place, right? The invasive snails. But the normal kind of abundance is not enough for the snail kites, apparently, to have a big nesting super site. So there has to be something weird that happened. that causes an explosion of their population. And in my book, I kind of get to the bottom of like what causes this boom and bust thing to happen here and there all over the state. But they need a boom and a bust. And then once one goes bust, they'll have to find a boom somewhere else. And so that's the problem. It's not that there's plenty of snails everywhere and so they're fine. It's they need a boom to happen every year or they don't have much in the way of nesting. So their numbers are kind of belying their vulnerability.
Well, I can't wait to read your book to understand that issue better, Hilary. Question: do the snail kites eat the invasive snails, apple snails? And Benji Stute quickly said yes. The invasive snails were actually integral to seeing the kites through the droughts of the 09-ish. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, if they were relying on the native snail, they may be extinct by now. So the invasive snail has pretty much saved them, but we can't rely on them necessarily. We do still need the Everglades to come back and the native snail to come back.
And I know you didn't touch on the fact that the research has shown that the snail kite's beak has grown slightly just so that they can access the larger invasive apple snails as well. So they have evolved, as I know, I'm sure you know more, just so that they can eat this abundance of native apple snails, of invasive apple snails.
Yeah, I didn't know that wildlife could adapt as rapidly as the snail kite is adapting. And what's most rapid of all is its behavioral adaptation. Like they know where the snails are before we even know. They're already nesting. And they find ways of getting into the bigger snails. They figured out behavioral ways to get in and not drop the snails because the snails were heavier. Like they will rise to pretty much every occasion. But I think it's time for us to help them, right? I think that they've kind of saved themselves up to this point. And I think that, we could do more. And I'm not saying Palm Beach County, but for instance, the way that the Everglades hydrology is being managed could change to better support snail kites and wildlife in the Everglades.
I think many of us couldn't agree more with that statement, Hilary. Pamela Saturday asked, is that the Palmetto Trail you are speaking of at the Waste Authority? And Autumn Curdy quickly said, yes, it is the Palmetto Trail. Jeannie,
the one I was thinking of is the Rookery Trail, I think.
Okay, so there's another one as well. Okay.
Yeah, but they have a whole trail map.
Okay.
So this is the Rookery Trail.
The Rookery, I believe, starts at the Palmetto Trailhead.
Oh, Trailhead. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I have to get out there.
You.
Anyway, I have boasted Jeannie Mauser says, I have boasted of our voters who voted to preserve and protect land here in Palm Beach County. I agree with Scott that we still need to encourage our county to take pride in decisions made and continue to protect our environment. And I think some of this would also be having the state place these lands on the critical habitat list. And I think
the feds, right? The Fish and Wildlife Service.
Right. I agree. Joanne Sheptak, amazing presentation. I agree. Thank you. I am a cyclist ride on the trails and saw a few kites last week on the C-18 canal and PGA Boulevard West where they nest. The swallowtail kites have begun their nesting as well near Rover Bend. Super exciting. So for those of you who like to cycle, there's a place to go to see snail kites, the C-18 canal. And
that's amazing.
Palm Beach Gardens Boulevard West. Pamela Wooten says, since their nests are so low to the water, what impacts have the pythons and iguanas had on destruction of the nests?
So I think that by the time the pythons were really exploding in the Everglades, the snail kites were kind of starting to move out. I don't think that the pythons have gotten very dense in the places where the snail kites are currently nesting. So for now, they haven't really overlapped, but that's a fascinating question because it seems like the pythons would help themselves to the eggs and the young.
And Brian Garrett is on the presentation tonight, And Brian Garrett works for the South Florida Water Management District and leads some of our field trips. I guess you know Brian. Anyway, so
Yes, Brian can answer that question.
Okay, yes. And he said what he says is very little of these heavy non-native reptiles. Other predators like raccoons, purple gallinules, and native snake are major predators to snail kite nests. So they're doing okay there, I guess.
Thanks,
And
Brian. Bye.
and so that's all for the questions. And I can't tell you enough how much we appreciated having you here tonight. And this presentation was extraordinary. I think we're all a little bit smarter now about our county, particularly in relationship to snail kites. And I think you've inspired many of us to want to get out there to some of these places that maybe we've overlooked and haven't, paid enough attention to. And I'm guilty of that as well. I tend to kind of, stick to the places I know and go back to them again and again. But I need to get out to some of these places to see the snail kites. So thank you, Hilary, and maybe one day we can have you back again and have you talk more about your research, and hopefully we can do a book. Our book club can feature your book, and maybe we can have you zoom in when we do that meeting. That would be extraordinary. And there it is. And so there's links in the chat for that, and hopefully some of you will pick up this, what I imagine is going to be a wonderful read. Thank you, Hilary.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight.
So it takes a team to help bring you these virtual presentations. So thank you to all of them. And we can't wait to see you on May 5th, 2026, where we will be welcoming celebrated cartoonist and author Rosemary Masco for a hilarious take on birding and ornithological terminology, Bird Words, a celebration of birding terminology with Birds and Moon's Rosemary Masco. You won't want to miss this humorous take on language some of us bird brains use. So good night. Thank you for joining us this evening. Enjoy fall migration, the Earth, Moon, and see you in May. Take care, everybody.